She had her father's hands. That was the thing that stopped Enzo Vitelli's heart before his brain had processed the rest of it. Before the wedding dress, before the man beside her, before the date stamp in the corner of the photograph that read 6 weeks ago. Her father's hands. Paolo Romano had the same long fingers, the same way of holding someone, careful and complete, like the person beside him was a thing worth keeping. Elena had those hands. And in the photograph, both of them were wrapped around the hand of Luca Drago. Luca Drago. The heir. The enemy's son. The man who had been groomed for 30 years to inherit everything that stood against everything Enzo had built. Enzo had raised Elena since she was 6 years old. 6 years old. He had taught her to read in this study. He had sat with her through her first nightmare in this house. He had walked her to every graduation she'd ever had and cried at 2 of them and spent the rest of his life hoping she hadn't noticed. She had been in this man's arms for 6 weeks. And Enzo was the last person in either family to know. The envelope had arrived before 7 in the morning, slid under the front door while the house still slept. No return address. No note. Just the photograph and a single line printed below it on plain paper. She chose. You should know. Enzo Vitelli stood in his study, 2nd floor, dark wood paneling, windows overlooking the courtyard where the fig tree Elena had helped him plant when she was 9 years old still stood, heavy and green, and he read that line 4 times. Then he looked at the photograph again. Then he pressed both palms flat on his desk and breathed slowly through his nose until the shaking in his hands stopped. It took a while. The Vitelli family had controlled the southern port district for 50 years. They did not move product, they moved decisions. Permits. Judges. The invisible machinery that commerce runs on and never acknowledges. Enzo's father had built it. Enzo had doubled it. And every year for the past 22 years, Elena Romano had sat at the table in this house for Sunday dinner and been, in some form he had never put a name to because it felt too much like a claim he hadn't earned, his. The Drago family ran the northern docks. 3 generations of containers and logistics, and paper that looked clean and wasn't. Salvatore Drago, the patriarch, was 65 and precise in the way of a man who had never needed to rush because he had always planned further ahead than anyone gave him credit for. His son Luca had been prepared for succession with the kind of deliberate care that made Enzo watch him from a distance for years, the way you watch someone who would eventually require a response. In the photograph, Luca Drago was holding Elena's hand like he was afraid she might disappear. Enzo Vitelli had been afraid of the same thing every day for 22 years. He picked up his phone and called Santo. Before we go further, where in the world are you right now? What time is it? Drop your city and the time in the comments. Whether it's 2 a.m. and something's keeping you up, or you're on your commute, I want to know who's here for this one. Let's see how far this story reaches. Santo answered on the 2nd ring. 2nd ring meant he was already awake. Already awake meant he already knew. She sent it. Enzo asked. A pause. Long enough to be an answer on its own. She didn't send it, Santo said. I don't know who did. But you knew. Another pause. The kind that comes not from hesitation but from deciding to stop pretending. Yeah, Santo said. I knew. Enzo set the phone down on the desk without ending the call. He could hear his son breathing on the other end. Santo, 34 years old, who had grown up treating Elena like a sister, who had driven her to her first college visit and sat in the parking lot for 4 hours reading a newspaper because she'd forgotten to tell him how long she'd be. That son had known for some amount of time that Elena Romano was married to Luca Drago, and had said nothing. Enzo picked the phone back up. How long? 6 months. 6 months. The photograph was dated 6 weeks ago. Santo had known 3 months before the wedding. You're coming here, Enzo said. Now. He hung up. He stood at the window. He looked at the fig tree and said nothing for a long time. 40 floors above the city's northern waterfront, Luca Drago had not slept. He had been sitting at the window since 3 in the morning, watching the city below move like slow water, the lights shifting and rearranging the way thoughts do when you can't stop them. Elena was asleep in the bedroom behind him, one arm stretched toward his empty space on the mattress, fingers slightly curled the way they always did when he got up, reaching for where he'd been, trying to hold on to the warmth of him. He had been watching her do this for 6 weeks of mornings. It undid him every time. He had sent the photograph himself. Not as a weapon. Not to create damage or force a confrontation on anyone else's schedule. He had sent it because Elena had been circling the question of when to tell Enzo for 2 months, and the answer she kept arriving at was not yet, and Luca had finally understood that not yet. In this situation, given what was moving in the background, was its own kind of cruelty. There was someone inside the Vitelli organization who had been watching the Drago-Vitelli boundary for 14 months. Luca knew this. His father knew this. Elena had begun to suspect it. That someone had started making inquiries about Elena specifically, her movements, her associations, 3 weeks ago. When Luca's people reported back, the shape of it was clear. Whoever this was, they had found the marriage. And their plan was not to quietly inform Enzo. Their plan was to use it, to weaponize it, to surface it at the worst possible moment in the worst possible way, and let the explosion do the work. Luca had sent the photograph to Enzo's study before sunrise. He wanted the man who had raised Elena to hear it first. Alone, with enough time to breathe before anyone tried to make the story into something it wasn't. He also, and this was the simpler truth under everything else, was tired of being a secret. Behind him, Elena stirred. "He got it," she said. "Not a question." "Probably," Luca said without turning. He heard her sit up. He heard the specific sound of her breathing change. The shift from sleep to waking to the full weight of the morning settling on her all at once. "I should have gone to him first," she said. "You kept saying that." "I know. You kept not doing it." "I know," she said quieter. Luca turned. She was sitting with the sheet around her waist, dark hair tangled, wearing the expression he had come to recognize as the one she wore when she was calculating the distance between two versions of herself. The version that had come from a house on Carmine Street and the version that had chosen to come here. "He's going to want to see you today," Luca said. "Yes. Are you ready?" Elena looked at him for a long moment. Her hazel eyes were steady. That particular steadiness he'd fallen in love with before he'd understood it. Before he'd realized it was what happened when a child learns to be calm in the presence of powerful men who can't always be trusted. "No," she said. "But I'm going." When Elena arrived at the house on Carmine Street, the front door was already open. Not open in welcome. Open in the way of a house where someone had been walking in and out for hours, unable to be still, checking the street the way you checked for something you knew was coming and still weren't ready for. She had seen this before. Enzo's body doing what his mind wouldn't let his mouth do yet. The physical language of a man trying to process something that didn't have a name. Santo was in the front room. He was sitting on the edge of the heavy wooden chair by the fireplace, elbows on his knees, not looking up. He looked like a man who had been standing in front of a firing squad for 6 months and was watching it actually start. "He's upstairs," Santo said. "He's not going to be loud about it. That's when he's worst. When he goes quiet." Elena put her hand on his shoulder briefly. Not reassurance, acknowledgement. "I know you're in this too." She went up the stairs. The study door was open. Enzo was at the window, back to her, looking down at the courtyard. He was still in yesterday's clothes, no jacket, no tie, which for Enzo Vitelli was as close to undressed as she'd ever seen him. The photograph was face up on the desk. She didn't look at it. She looked at him. "Sit down," he said without turning. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap. She waited. He let the silence run. She counted it, a full minute, maybe longer. She had sat in this room her entire life. Had done homework here, been scolded here, been praised here, cried here at 17 and again at 23. She knew the acoustics of his silences the way you knew the particular sounds of the house you grew up in. This was the silence of something broken. Enzo turned. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. The photograph was on the desk between them. "How long have you known him?" he asked. 2 years. A small exhale. Not surprise, processing. 2 years, he repeated. "You've known a Drago for 2 years." "Yes." "And you married him?" 6 weeks ago. Enzo moved from the window to behind his desk. He didn't sit. He stood with both hands gripping the back of his chair, knuckles pale against the wood. "Do you know," he said, very quiet, "what that family is to this one?" "Yes," Elena said. "Do you know what they did to us?" "I know what you believe they did," she said. "Yes." The room went very still. Enzo let go of the chair. He walked around the desk and stopped a few feet in front of her. For a moment he just looked at her. The man who had sat with her through nightmares, who had taught her to drive in an empty parking lot in the rain, who had cried at her graduations while pretending he wasn't. And Elena watched something move through his face that she couldn't name. "Did he find you?" Enzo asked. "Or did you find him?" "He found me. But I chose to stay." "There's a difference?" "There's every difference in the world," she said. He had been prepared for guilt. Prepared for a young woman seduced by proximity, by the romance of a forbidden line. prepared for naivety or recklessness or plain rebellion. He had not been prepared for knowledge. When he first approached me, Elena said, I knew exactly who he was. I'd known the name Drago my entire life. I knew what you thought of them and why. She paused. I also knew that I'd spent 22 years inside the truth as this family told it, and I had never once been allowed to look for a different version. Enzo stared at her. You went looking, he said. I listened. At first, that was all. He talked. I listened. Then I started asking questions that nobody in this house ever asked, because nobody in this house was allowed to. What questions? Elena held his gaze. About the fire, she said. The word hit the room like a piece of glass dropped on stone. Enzo went completely still. The fire, the East Side building, 22 years ago, the night that killed her parents, the night that had ended with 6-year-old Elena Romano being brought to this house because there was nowhere else for her to go and Enzo Vitelli had said she comes here. This is not a discussion. That fire was the fixed point around which everything in the Vitelli understanding of the Drago family had been built for 2 decades. The Dragos had said it. That was the truth as Enzo knew it. The truth he had lived inside for 22 years. Luca showed me things, Elena said. Her voice was careful. Not cold. Public records. Insurance filings. The original fire marshal's report. Things that were never properly examined at the time. She paused. I spent 4 months going through all of it before I agreed to a second meeting. And what I found didn't line up with what I'd been told. Enzo said nothing. I'm not here to tell you the Dragos are innocent, she said. I'm here because you have the right to know that I made this choice with my eyes open. I wasn't romantic, and I wasn't foolish, and I wasn't talked into anything I didn't understand. I made a choice. And I made it because something about the story of how my parents died has never been right. She stopped. Breathed once. I needed to find out what. The room was absolutely still. Outside, a bird was somewhere near the fig tree. Enzo sat down very slowly in his chair, as if his legs had decided before his mind did. He looked at the photograph on the desk. He looked at Elena. And for the first time in her life, in 22 years of watching this man, Elena Romano watched Don Enzo Vitelli look afraid. Santo came up when he heard the silence change. He didn't knock. He walked in and looked at his father sitting behind the desk, and Elena sitting across from him, and felt the temperature of whatever had just happened between them. She told you, Santo said. Enzo looked at his son. You knew about the documents. I knew she had questions. I knew she'd been looking. Santo stopped in the doorway. I didn't know what she'd found. But you knew about Luca. 6 months. Yes. Enzo's jaw tightened. You kept this from me for 6 months. I kept it because she asked me to. Santo crossed into the room and pulled up the second chair. He sat beside Elena, not behind her, not tactically, but close, the way you sat beside someone about to face something hard. And because of something else. Something I should have said a long time ago. He looked at his father. I don't think the Dragos ordered the fire, Santo said. The room went very quiet. Enzo looked at his son for a long time. You've never said that to me, Enzo said. You've never been ready to hear it. And now I am? No, Santo said. But now it doesn't matter whether you're ready. Elena married into the Drago family. Which means whatever the truth is, we're in it whether we want to be or not. Enzo stood up. He walked back to the window. He stood there with his back to both of them and looked at the fig tree and the morning sky and was quiet for a long time. 3 doors. He could see all of them. The first, accept the marriage. Reach out to Salvatore Drago. Formalize whatever his daughter had already started. Use Elena's position to build something that looked like peace. Swallow 22 years of certainty and grief and turn it into leverage. Cost, everything he had believed since the fire. The story of Elena's parents. The shape of his own guilt. The reason he had told himself he took her in. The second, force Elena to choose. The marriage or this family. The house on Carmine Street or the man she had married. Give her an ultimatum and watch which way she ran. Cost, Elena herself. He knew her well enough to know she would not come back on those terms. She had come here prepared. She hadn't come here to be retrieved. The third was the one that made his stomach turn before he'd consciously let himself think it. Elena was inside the Drago family now. She was married to the heir. She would hear things, be present for things, that no Vitelli operative had ever gotten close to. That access had a name. It had a purpose. And deploying it would take 22 years of genuine love and rebuild it as a transaction. He had sat in rooms where men made this calculation without flinching. Standing at his own window, he flinched. I need to think, Enzo said. I know, Elena said. You'll stay in the city. Don't go anywhere until. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I live here. I've always lived here. I just also live somewhere else now. Enzo nodded once. He heard the door close and understood he was alone. Whose side are you on right now, Enzo's or Elena's? Drop it in the comments. I want to see where this audience stands. Santos stayed after Elena left. He stayed the way he always did, not with words but with presence. He sat in the empty chair and waited, because he had learned before his teens that his father needed the room to breathe before he needed it to talk. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Enzo turned from the window. Tell me why, Enzo said. Not Santo, who was protecting Elena. Tell me why you don't believe it. Santo had been preparing for this conversation for 6 months. The building on the east side, he said. The one where her parents lived. It was Vitelli property, Papa. Not Drago. The Dragos had no access to that building without someone from our side opening the door. Enzo was still. The timing, Santo continued carefully. It was 4 days after the vote on the Southern District restructuring. About who was going to control the permit authority going forward. Someone in this organization lost something significant in that vote. Someone who had a reason to send a message. He paused. Elena's father, Paolo Romano, cast the deciding vote. He voted against the losing faction. You're saying someone from this family. I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying the shape of it never fit the story we were told. And when Elena started asking questions 2 years ago, I looked again. He met his father's eyes. I still don't know everything. But I know enough to know that what we've been certain of was never properly examined. Enzo sat down. He looked like a man watching a wall he'd lived inside develop a crack he couldn't look away from. Your mother, he said slowly. Does she? I don't know what Mama knows, Santo said. But I think you should ask her. Luca drove north to the docks that morning to see his father, because the day after a secret breaks is the day you find out who everyone actually is. The Drago family's primary offices occupied a repurposed warehouse on Pier 7. Deliberately ordinary from the outside. Deliberately cold inside. Exposed steel, industrial glass, white light harsh enough to make every conversation feel like a deposition. Salvatore Drago had designed the interior himself, which told you something precise about him. He was standing at the long table when Luca came in, reviewing a manifest, as though today were a regular Tuesday. He knows, Luca said. Salvatore didn't look up. I assumed you'd handle that. I sent the photograph this morning. I know. He set down the manifest and looked at his son. His eyes were pale gray-blue, the color of cold water. Eyes Luca had spent his entire childhood trying to read. I'm not asking about the photograph. I'm asking whether she went to him. She went this morning. And? I don't know yet. She'll call. Salvatore nodded once and was quiet. You knew this was always coming, Luca said. Not an accusation. Simply true. Everything was always going to come to this moment, Salvatore said. The only question was whether it came through Elena or someone else. Someone else would have been worse. Luca looked at his father. How long have you been planning for this moment exactly? Salvatore considered the question with the deliberateness he brought to every question that actually mattered. 15 years, he said. Since I found the document. The warehouse hummed with the sound of the water outside and a forklift moving something heavy across concrete, somewhere deep in the building. You never told me, Luca said. You were 19. I'm 32 now. I know. Salvatore moved to the window overlooking the dock. I didn't tell you because knowing changes how you carry it. How you look at the Vitellis every time you're in a room with them. I didn't want you to hate them before I was ready to use it for something other than destruction. And Elena? A pause. Elena I told on the second meeting, Salvatore said. Luca had known this. Elena had told him herself months ago, on the night they'd both decided no more secrets between them. But hearing his father say it out loud was different. The words had a different weight coming from this man in this room. She agreed to continue after that, Luca said. She did. She chose me knowing. She chose you knowing the truth, knowing the history, knowing what it might cost her, and knowing that this moment, what is happening today, was eventually going to be required. Salvatore turned to look at his son. She didn't marry you as a strategy. I want to be precise about that. What she feels for you is real. I am certain of it. But she also understands what she carries. She has always understood it. That girl has been holding the weight of 2 families since she was 6 years old. She just didn't have the full picture until she found one. Luca looked at his father. The document, he said. The real one. We need to give it to Vitelli. Salvatore said nothing. Not as leverage. Not in exchange for anything. Just give it to him. Because it's what Elena has been working toward. Because it's what should have happened 15 years ago. Salvatore looked at his son for a long moment. You love her, he said. Yes. And you understand that giving Vitelli the truth about his own organization might destabilize his authority from the inside. Yes. And you're willing to carry that. Luca thought about Elena's hands, the specific way she held things she cared about, careful and completely present, and said, We've been carrying half-truths for 22 years. I'm done with it. The document arrived at Carmine Street that afternoon, hand-delivered to Santo by a Drago courier, in a plain envelope with no markings. Santo stood in the hallway outside the study for 5 full minutes before going in. He put the envelope on his father's desk without speaking. Enzo looked at it for a moment. Then he opened it. 3 pages. The first was a series of internal communications, Vitelli communications, dated 22 years ago, from the 10 days before the fire. Wire confirmations. Coded references to an address on the east side. A reference to the problem with Romano. A date. The second was an order. Formalized in the private shorthand that organized crime used when it wanted paper that could be denied, but not misunderstood. The order had been issued from within the Vitelli organization, not from outside it. The name at the bottom was not Salvatore Drago. The third page was the original fire marshal's report, annotated in small, precise handwriting. 7 specific discrepancies between the physical evidence and the official finding that the fire had been set from outside the building. Enzo read all 3 pages twice. Then he sat without moving for a very long time. The name on the order was Johnny Esposito, one of his father's oldest and most trusted lieutenants. A man who had died of a heart attack in 2007. A man at whose funeral Enzo had stood up and given the eulogy. Had looked Johnny's widow in the eyes and told her that her husband had been a loyal man. A loyal man. Johnny Esposito had been on the losing side of the vote about the Southern District Permit Authority. Enzo's father had outmaneuvered him. The restructuring had cut his operational power significantly. Elena's father, Paolo Romano, had cast the deciding vote. He had voted for Enzo's father. Voted against Esposito. And 4 days later, a building on the east side had caught fire. The Dragos had not said it. A man within the Vitelli organization, a man loyal to a faction that had lost to Enzo's own father at a table, had ordered it as punishment for a vote cast honestly. The Drago family had been blamed for 22 years because they were a convenient shape for the blame to land on. Because the timing was approximately right. Because it was easier to believe the enemy did it than to look at what lived inside your own walls. Enzo Vitelli sat in the study that still smelled of his dead father's pipe tobacco and understood what 22 years of wrongly aimed certainty felt like when the floor beneath it disappeared. He had raised Elena Romano because he believed his family's rivals had killed her parents. The love was real. He did not doubt that for a single second. But it had been built on top of a story that was wrong. And the man he had eulogized as loyal had given the order that made her an orphan. He found Carmela in the garden. She was deadheading the roses, the October roses she tended every year without fail. And she didn't stop when she heard him come through the door. Her hands kept working. Her back stayed turned. You found out, she said. Not what did you find. Not what is it. She already knew. Enzo stopped a few feet behind her. How long? He said. Carmela set her shears down on the garden wall. She turned around slowly. Her face was not guilty. It was tired. The deep, accumulated tired of years of carrying something that had no good place to put itself down. 8 years ago, she said. During the renovation. I was going through boxes from your father's office. There was a letter. I didn't understand all of it. But I understood enough. I took it to someone who could tell me what it meant. She held his gaze. It was Esposito. Not the Dragos. The garden was very still. A fig leaf drifted down from the tree and settled on the stone path between them. 8 years, Enzo said. I couldn't tell you, Carmela said. Because telling you meant telling Elena. And if she learned her parents didn't die because of the Dragos, that they died because of a man inside our own family, then everything changed. She wasn't the orphan we rescued from our enemy. She was the orphan we rescued from ourselves. She stopped. Her chin lifted slightly. I didn't know if she'd stay. I didn't know if she'd want to. Enzo looked at his wife. 36 years of marriage. 36 years of dinners and conversations, and the particular daily intimacy of a life shared. He had thought he knew the architecture of her, the open rooms, the closed ones. He had not known about this room. You preserved our family's moral authority, he said slowly, by keeping her in the dark. I kept her safe, Carmela said. That's not the same thing. No, Carmela agreed quietly. She picked up her shears and turned back to the roses. And without turning around, in the voice of someone releasing a thing they have held for a very long time. I was afraid she'd leave. The garden held the words. And then it went quiet again. By 6 that evening Enzo had sat in the dark long enough to arrive at something that surprised him. Not rage, not grief, but a cold and clarifying determination. He called Salvatore Drago's number. A number he'd kept for 12 years, strictly in case of war. And when Salvatore answered, Enzo said only, I received the document. A pause. Yes, Salvatore said. You'll come here. Tomorrow, 9 in the morning. Alone. Salvatore was quiet for a moment. 65 years of careful thinking on the other end of the line. Yes, he said. Enzo hung up and called Elena. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been holding the phone in her hand. Tomorrow morning, he said. 9 o'clock. You'll be here. Enzo. Not for any arrangement. Not for strategy. You'll be here because this conversation belongs to you as much as anyone. A pause. It always has. A long silence on her end. Thank you, she said. Her voice, when she said it, was small and careful. The voice of the 6-year-old girl who had first come to this house. The one who had tried so hard, for so many years, not to need too much. Enzo pressed his palm flat on the desk. Is he a good man? He asked. Your husband. He heard her breath shift. Yes, she said. He loves you. Yes. And you love him. Yes. Enzo nodded at the empty room. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow will be long. Retention spike number 5, 41 minute, type 1. The big reframe. Salvatore arranged their meeting. Elena knew from day one. Biggest spike, place subscribe CTA immediately after. Salvatore Drago arrived at 9 o'clock exactly. He came alone as agreed. No driver, no escort. A man in his mid-60s in a gray coat walking up the steps of a house he had known about his entire professional life and entered for the first time this morning. He moved with the specific quality of someone who had been preparing for a moment for a long time and had decided, somewhere on the drive over, to be completely honest. Santa let him in. Enzo was in the study. Elena was in the chair she'd sat in the day before, still and prepared. Salvatore came in and looked at Elena first. The look was not strategic. It was not the look of a man examining an asset. It was the look of someone who had asked a great deal of a person and was in the presence of the fact that they had done it anyway. Elena, Salvatore said. Salvatore, she said. He sat across from Enzo. 2 men regarding each other. 30 years of opposition, 30 years of managed distance. The specific texture of 2 intelligent people who had been each other's primary obstacle and had both understood they would eventually have to be in the same room without weapons between them. The document, Enzo said. Yes. 15 years. Yes. Why now? Because for 15 years I had information and no vehicle. Information alone is a weapon. A weapon can only destroy. He paused. I needed a bridge. You chose Elena. I saw her at an art opening on the north side. 2.5 years ago. He folded his hands on his knees, not clasped, not restless, simply present. I recognized her. I walked over. I used my name. The first word I said to her was my name. Elena said quietly. He didn't pretend to be anyone else. I knew exactly who was standing in front of me. I told her I had information about the fire that killed her parents, Salvatore continued. That I had been looking for the right moment to share it for many years. I asked if she would meet me. And she met you. She met me. We talked for 3 hours. I showed her the shape of what I had. He paused. I also told her where I found it, documents from Esposito, which he had quietly shared with my father as personal insurance. My father kept them. When I inherited his estate, I found them. I had them verified. Your father kept them, Enzo said. He kept them the way careful men keep things they don't know what to do with yet. Salvatore's voice was measured. He did not volunteer the truth. For that I cannot make an apology that carries weight. I can only tell you what I chose to do when it was mine to decide. You chose Elena. I met a young woman who had been orphaned by a crime committed inside the family that raised her. A crime she had never been told the truth about. And I understood that she deserved better than to live the rest of her life in a house built on top of that lie. He paused. And yes, I thought that if she chose to belong to both of our families, if she chose to be the place where this could surface without destroying everything in the process, That would be better than anything else I could see. Luca, Enzo said. Your son. Salvatore was quiet for a moment. I introduced them, he said. I arranged for them to be at the same event. I used my name to make the introduction. He looked at Elena. I want to be precise. I did not ask Luca to pursue her. I did not tell him the full history until later, until it was clear it was serious. I introduced them because I thought they would be good for each other. A pause. Something crossed his face that was close to warmth. And because I thought she needed someone who would see her whole. Not as a Vitelli. Not as the orphan. As herself. Elena looked at her hands in her lap. And then it happened, Salvatore said. And I told Luca the truth on the night I understood it was real, because he had the right to know what he was walking into. He was angry. For about a week. A slight pause. Then he came back and said it didn't change anything. Enzo turned to Elena. He told you, Enzo said. Everything. On the second meeting. The second meeting, she confirmed. After I'd already spent 2 months looking at public records on my own. He told me everything he had before I agreed to see him a third time. Why didn't you tell me? Enzo asked. The question was quiet. It was the real question, under everything else he'd been asking for 2 days. Elena's expression changed. Something in it came open. Because I needed to love you before I could hurt you, she said. And I needed to be certain of Luca before I could ask you to trust him. And I needed the document in someone else's hands, someone you couldn't look at and think Drago influence, before you could receive it. She stopped. I wanted to be the bridge. But I couldn't be the messenger. Not for this. Not to you. The study was completely still. Enzo looked at the 2 people across his desk. The patriarch of the family he'd spent 30 years opposing, and the woman he'd raised since she was 6 years old, who had walked into the middle of a decades-long war with her eyes clear and her hands steady, and had decided, against everything, at enormous cost to herself, to try to make something better out of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then, what do you want from this meeting? Stories like this one, they don't tell themselves. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to see how this family survives what's coming, hit subscribe. That's how we keep these stories alive. What Salvatore wanted was simple, which was why it was impossible. He wanted a statement, jointly issued between both families on record. The fire of 22 years ago was not the work of the Drago family. The investigation was misdirected. The original order came from within the Vitelli organization. Not in private. Not buried in a room between 4 people. On record. In the form that would exist in the permanent memory of everyone who needed to know. You understand what that does to me, Enzo said. Yes, Salvatore said. It changes the present. It tells everyone in this city that for 22 years, we've been carrying a story about your family that wasn't true. Yes. It hands my enemies inside this organization a weapon. You have a choice, Salvatore said. You always have. You can continue as you have been, the truth buried, the marriage managed quietly, everything handled from the inside. Or you can do what Elena came here to ask you to do. He looked at her. Tell him. Elena took a breath. She looked at Enzo. The man who had sat with her through nightmares, walked her to her graduations, cried at 2 of them, and she said, I don't want revenge for what happened to my parents. I'm not angry at you. I've never been angry at you. She paused. But I have spent my entire life inside a story where the only thing my parents' deaths were allowed to mean was a reason for this family to hate another family. And they were people. They had names. They had a life. They died because of a petty calculation by a man who didn't get what he wanted at a table. Her voice stayed even. I want that to be what their deaths mean. Not a war. Not a lie that was easier than the truth. Not 22 years of hate pointed at the wrong family. She stopped. I want you to say what happened. Not for strategy. Not for any deal. For them. For my parents. The room was silent. Enzo Vitelli looked at the woman his daughter had become. He thought about Paolo Romano, a careful and decent man who had voted honestly at a table because he believed in the right outcome and had died for it. He thought about Marta Romano, Elena's mother. He had met her 3 times, he remembered her laugh, loud and sudden, the kind that surprised a room. He had given their daughter a home. He had given her love that was real. He had also given her a lie he had believed completely. And she had found out. And instead of burning the house down, she had built a bridge. Enzo looked at Salvatore. The statement, how it's worded matters. I know, Salvatore said. We do this together. Yes. Esposito is dead. His widow is still alive. His children. That is between you and them, Salvatore said. A silence. Your son, Enzo said. He will, he stopped. Rearrange something inside himself. He will treat her well. Salvatore looked at him steadily. He loves her, he said. The simplicity of it, from this careful and complicated man, was its own kind of evidence. She married him as herself. He loves her as herself. Whatever else this is, that is real. Enzo nodded once. Be honest, what would you have done in Enzo's position? Issue the statement knowing it hands your enemies a weapon, or find another way to handle it. There's no right answer. Drop it in the comments. Carmela came into the study. She walked past Santo at the door without acknowledgement, nodded at Salvatore with the particular steadiness of a woman who had decided to stop performing, and sat down in the chair beside Elena. She looked at her daughter. Not the girl she'd taken in. Not the ward. Her daughter. The word she had used in her own mind every day for 22 years while being careful never to say it out loud, because it felt like a claim she hadn't earned. I should have told you, Carmela said. 8 years ago. When I found it. Elena looked at her. The expression on her face was not anger. It was the expression of someone absorbing a truth that changes the texture of every memory they own. Why didn't you? Elena asked. Because I was afraid, Carmela said. I've already told your father. I was afraid you'd leave. That knowing your parents died because of something inside this family, knowing your father died for a vote he cast honestly and was never protected for it, would make this place feel wrong. Make us feel wrong. She paused. I told myself it was protection, but it was fear. I didn't have the strength to do the right thing. Elena was quiet. You kept me here, she said slowly, by keeping me inside a story that wasn't true. Yes. A long silence. The personal cost of the next moment was this. Elena Romano, 28 years old, who had spent 2 years building toward a truth she'd already half known in her bones, had to decide whether the love of the woman who raised her survived the knowledge of what that love had also withheld. She reached out. She put her hand over Carmela's hand on the arm of the chair. Carmela's breath caught. I'm not leaving, Elena said quietly. I was never going to leave. That's what neither of you understood. I went looking for the truth because I needed to know it, not because I was building a reason to go. This is my home. She paused. It always has been. Carmela closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet. Elena looked at Enzo. I need you to understand, she said, that this statement isn't about the families. It's not about the Dragos being cleared, or about any arrangement between two operations going forward. My parents deserve to have the truth told about what happened to them. They were people. They voted honestly and they died for it. And for 22 years the man who ordered their deaths has been remembered as loyal while an entire family has been blamed. Her voice was even, but the edge under it was real. I need you to say what happened. Publicly. Formally. Not for me. For them. The cost was real. Enzo had catalogued it. The enemies inside his own organization who would use this to question his authority. The decades of narrative that would need dismantling. The possibility that truth, arriving at this particular moment, would invite chaos he couldn't fully predict. He thought about Marta Romano's laugh. Loud and sudden and completely surprising. He thought about Elena at 6 years old, small and precise and not crying, not because she wasn't in pain, but because she had learned already somehow to hold grief with both hands without letting it knock her over. I'll make the statement, Enzo said. They drafted the statement that afternoon in Enzo's study, the two patriarchs across from each other, a clean sheet of paper between them. It took 3 hours. Every word mattered. This document would exist in the permanent memory of everyone it needed to reach, and it needed to be clear without being a provocation, truthful without triggering the kind of chaos every opportunist in both organizations would rush to exploit. Enzo wrote most of it. Salvatore edited it. Elena read the final draft and changed 2 sentences, made them more direct, more human, less managed. Both men accepted her changes without argument. By 4 in the afternoon, the October light in the study had shifted from gray morning to deep gold, the specific quality of late light that made the old wood paneling glow as if lit from inside. Enzo signed it. Salvatore signed it. There was no handshake, no toast, no ceremony. 2 men who had spent 30 years on opposite sides of a line, putting their names on a truth they had both lived around for 2 decades without possessing. Elena stood between them while they signed and looked at neither. She looked out the window at the courtyard and the fig tree and the afternoon light on the stone. Santo came in from the doorway, read the document over his father's shoulder, and said one word. Good. Quiet. Complete. There were things the statement did not resolve. The boundary between the Vitelli Southern District and the Drago Northern Docks remained exactly what it had always been, managed, tense, no cleaner than before. The question of Johnny Esposito's family, his widow, his 2 sons, who believed their father to be a loyal man, was left explicitly to Enzo. He accepted it without flinching. In accepting it, he aged visibly. And then there was the third thing. The thing Luca brought to Carmine Street that evening when he arrived. Entering the house for the first time, shaking Enzo's hand in the hallway with the gravity of a man who understood exactly what that handshake meant and was choosing to mean it. They sat alone in the study. "I sent the photograph myself," Luca said. "My decision. Not my father's. Not Elena's. I sent it because I was tired of the secret and because I was worried about what happened if it surfaced through someone else." Enzo looked at him. "Someone else? There's a man inside your organization who has been watching the Vitelli-Drago boundary for 14 months. He's been making inquiries not about territory, not about operations. About Elena. Her movements. Her associations. 3 weeks ago, my father's people confirmed he had found the marriage." Luca paused. "His plan was not to inform you. It was to weaponize it. Surface it at the worst moment. Use it to argue that Elena had betrayed the family, and use that to undermine your leadership." Enzo sat very still. A man inside his own organization, watching Elena for over a year, had found the marriage, was still there. "I'll find him," Enzo said. "We can help," Luca said. Enzo looked at his son-in-law. The phrase arrived in his mind with an almost physical weight. Son-in-law. A Drago. Sitting in his father's chair in his father's study. Strange. But the man in that chair had honest eyes and had come here honestly and had loved Elena with a sincerity that was visible in every word he chose. "We'll find him," Enzo said, making the we deliberate. Luca held his gaze. "Families never settle," Enzo said. Luca didn't blink. "No, but they make deals." It was not peace. It was not full trust. These were not things built in an afternoon, and both men understood this. It was a handhold, a first contact. The beginning of something that would require years and more conflict, and certainly more pain before it earned a cleaner name. But it was something. The end is never the end. Elena walked home through the autumn streets. She didn't take a car. She walked down Carmine Street, through the square, past the bakery that had been there since before she was born, past the church where she had attended midnight mass every Christmas Eve, past the fountain where she had thrown coins as a child and made wishes she'd kept secret. She walked because she needed the air and the ordinary sound of the city around her after a day that had taken 22 years of architecture and dismantled most of it. Luca was at the kitchen counter making coffee when she came in. He looked up, and she saw the particular watching in his face. The quiet vigilance, the "is she okay?" the thing he never said directly but expressed in 10,000 small attentions since the day they met. "How is he?" Luca asked. "Tired," Elena said. "Honest. Still himself. He'll be okay." He handed her a cup. She sat at the table and wrapped both hands around it. "Your father chose me because I was the bridge," she said. "Yes. You knew that eventually." "Eventually. Not at first." He sat across from her. "At first I just knew there was a woman at a dinner who laughed at something I said and then argued with me for 45 minutes about whether the argument I'd made held up. Did it? It did not. She was right." He paused. "About several things. I found this to be a consistent pattern." Elena almost smiled. "There's a man in the Vitelli organization who was trying to use our marriage to bring Enzo down," she said. "Your father and my father are now cooperating to find him. The 2 families are working together for the first time in 30 years. Yes, that has approximately 10,000 possible consequences we can't predict." "At least," Luca said. "But the statement exists. My parents' names are on something that says what actually happened to them." Her voice was even and quiet. "That's not going away." "No," he said. "That's not going away." She looked at him across the table. Outside, the city continued its ordinary evening. Traffic and voices and something cooking nearby, the specific soundtrack of a city that was always moving, always negotiating, always making deals it would never call peace. The Vitelli and the Drago families had not settled. They had made a deal. And somewhere inside the Vitelli organization, a man who had been watching Elena Romano for 14 months had not finished what he'd started. Had not yet made the move he had been building toward. Had not yet shown who he was connected to. That man was still there. And what he was connected to, the second thread of the story that began 22 years ago in a burning building on the east side, was something neither family, with all their careful competence, was yet prepared for. This chapter was over. The next one had already begun. That's where this chapter ends. But in this world, nothing ever really ends. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what comes next.